Hello everyone. The purpose of this video is to teach the Vienna opening for white. There are two main lines that I'm going to be going into, namely the Vienna Gambit and the copycat variation of the Vienna game, which are likely the two lines you'll see the most when playing this opening. I want to start by saying I'm not a GM. I play at a 1300 online Blitz ELO, so if there's any glaring errors with the theory in this video, that's why. However, when I was a beginner, the Vienna got me to about 900 ELO without much struggle, and that's just because it's an excellent opening for beginners. It's very principled, so that makes it easy to play with white, but it's also very aggressive, which means it catches your beginner opponents off guard a lot of the time. That being said, it's not a great opening if you're playing against intermediate or advanced players, because with correct defense it often leads to drawn positions, and that's why it's not seen at the professional level very often. Also, I'll add that I'm trying to record this all in one take, so apologies for any uncomfortable pauses or stuttering as I try to recall my opening theory. So, what is the Vienna opening? The Vienna starts with e4, followed by e5, and is characterized by this move knight to c3. From this point forward, black has two main responses. Black can play knight to f6, which leads to the Vienna Gambit, or black can play knight to c6, which leads to the copycat variation. Let's start with the Vienna Gambit. The Vienna Gambit is a brutal opening to play against for those without proper understanding of opening principles, which is why it often leads to clearly winning positions against beginners. So after black plays this move knight to f6, white is going to respond by playing pawn to f4. Now this originally just looks like a free pawn to many playing black, and they're going to take this pawn. However, this leads to a clearly losing position this early in the opening because white can respond with this move, pawn to e5, attacking the knight. Now, you'll notice this knight only has 5 squares that it can move to, and 4 of which are defended by white's pieces. So, this knight has no choice but to move back to its original square on g8. Now, notice how black has essentially not moved any of their pieces, but they have this one really odd isolated pawn marooned on the outside of the board. Meanwhile, white has these two beautifully open diagonals and a lot of center control here with the pawn and the knight. That's why black cannot accept this gambit, and it only gets worse from here on out. However, white needs to play carefully. It's important that white plays this move knight to g3 to block an incoming check from the queen on h4. Say we try and defend our pawn instead. Black will play queen to h4 check. We can defend, but really, black's just going to tear up the king side here for white. You're going to have to get rid of your right to castle and block off these two diagonals, one of the developing squares of the knight. And it's not exactly as clear anymore if white has a superiority in this game. So it's really important that this move knight to g3 is played. From here on out, black's often going to attack the pawn in the center, try and get rid of your center control. Now we can defend it. And what I'm going to go into is if black takes this pawn, instead of taking back with, say, the pawn or the knight, what we're going to do is instead play queen to e2 and pin this pawn to the king. So now black has a choice to make. They can either try and defend this pawn on e5, or they can continue the game with natural development and let us take the pawn. Black's best choice, actually, is to do just that. Play moves like knight c6, maybe get this bishop out to pin our queen, and really just give us back this pawn. However, at the beginner level, you're not going to find many players who are used to giving up pieces in the opening, and they're going to want to defend it, which is not the correct choice. The ways they're going to defend it often are pawn to f6, bishop to d6, or most often knight to c6, and we're going to go over each one of these variations. Firstly, what happens if black plays pawn to f6? Now, this is a terrible move. For those of you who watch Ben Feingold videos, you'll know he says, never play pawn to f6. And this case is no exception. It blocks off the natural developing square of the knight. It blocks off the diagonal for this queen. And it's just a bad move in general. So what we're going to do in this position is take the pawn. Black's going to take back because that's why they put it there, to defend it. And now a reoccurring thing in the Vienna that you're going to see is we're going to play this move bishop to f4, taking advantage of the pin that we have on the king. Black cannot take our bishop because it would put the king in check. That's an illegal move. Now, From here on out, black can continue trying to defend the pawn, but really we can just take it, and now we have a completely winning position. So f6 clearly doesn't work for white. So what happens if they play bishop to d6? Again, we respond by playing bishop takes on f4, taking advantage of the pin. Black can play another developing move, say knight to c6, probably the most common move. And again, we just take the pawn back. This trade's going to happen. We get this check again, and we have fun with our winning position. Most often, you're going to see this move, however, knight to c6, and that's because black's going to notice that they're attacking this pawn with 2 pieces. They're defending this pawn with their knight. Meanwhile, we can only defend this pawn with 1 of our pieces. So, we respond by ignoring this attack completely and playing our move bishop to f4. Now, if black takes this pawn, which they're likely going to do, they're going to see an attack on the queen, and they're going to say, you know, your pawn's only defended by one piece. They're probably going to take it. This is actually a terrible blunder for black. We take back. They're going to take and say, wow, we just won a free knight. However, taking the pawn now with our bishop, we've set up a really nasty trap. Firstly, we're attacking their queen, so they gotta move their queen this move. But more importantly, we've set up a discovered a check on the black queen. So no matter where this queen moves, really, say they move the queen over here to b6, we can take this pawn in the corner with a discovered check on the king and attack on the rook. So really, no matter what happens from this position, say they just block with the bishop, we're going to win the rook in the corner, and white's just completely winning as well. So overall, black cannot accept the gambit. It's completely winning for white, and you should have no trouble winning the game. So the other main response that we're most often going to see from black in the Vienna opening is this move knight to c6, which leads to what's called the copycat variation. We respond by playing bishop to c4. Black's going to play bishop to c5, and this is going to happen very frequently in many beginner games because beginners often like symmetry, and they're just going to see this in the center of the board. They're going to think it's very equal, it's very nice, and yeah, beginners are going to play the symmetrical moves more often than not just because they're easy to follow. Now, from here, what we need to play is this move, queen to g4, which leads to a nasty trap if played incorrectly from black. This move, queen to g4, attacks this pawn here on g7, and if we win that pawn, we're likely going to win this rook as well on h8. So, black's got to defend this pawn. What are they going to do? Queen to f6 is the best move for black to play. Also, beginners are going to see this attack here on the king, think that it's going to lead to checkmate, and it's going to be, ooh, I'm defending this pawn and also threatening your king. Now, the move that white needs to play in this position is knight to d5, attacking the queen, but also opening up an attack on the c7 pawn, which would fork the rook and the king. Black is probably going to take, in which case we just need to play, scoot the king to the side over to d1. Now all of our attacks still stand. We've got this threat here, we've got this threat here, threatening a further fork in the future, and it looks like black is in big trouble. Furthermore, if black just plays a waiting move, like say a6, we've got this really nasty move, knight to h3. Most people aren't going to expect this because people say, you know, you shouldn't move your knight out to the rim of the board. However, you'll see this move attacks the queen, and this queen actually only has one square that's safe for it to move to. White's pieces block off every square on the f-file. This rook defends these 3 squares, and the queen and the pawn defend those 2 squares. Really, the queen's only move is to go here to d4. And after d4, white can simply play pawn to d3, and this queen is completely trapped. It's got nowhere to go. And c3 is coming, you're going to win the queen. So that's a really easy way for black to mess up in this position. They can't just play a rating move. and they really do need to deal with these two threats, and they often don't know what to do. Really, black's best move is to play king to f8, give up this pawn, and defend the attack with the queen here on g7. Again, you're not going to see many beginners doing this because they're not as good at evaluating different threats on the board. So from this position, white continues with the attack on the queen. You go knight to g3. So, again, one thing black can do here is just end up getting their queen trapped. However, black's most potent idea in this position is to play this in-between move, or Zwischenzug, which is pawn to h4 attacking our queen. So, the move here for white is to continue the attack, another theme in the Vienna, and play this move, queen to g5. Black will likely play this to attack the queen further, in which case we scoot our queen up. And now, if black plays this move, rook to h6, which they will likely do, continuing the attack on the queen, we've got this really, really beautiful tactical move, knight to e6. So, they've got a few things that they can do. What happens if they take with this knight? Well, for those of you who are paying attention, that's checkmate. Same goes if they take with this knight. So black is really in trouble here. What they've got to do is take the queen with the rook. You follow up by taking the rook with your knight. That's a check. And you'll notice that this bishop actually defends the square that the king would naturally move to attack the knight. They can't move there, and they've got to go out of here, which allows you to take the queen. They'll follow up by taking your knight, and then you can take this knight in the corner. And you'll see here that white has a +4 advantage. Your pieces are more active, and the position is clearly winning for white. So overall, the copycat variation as well, if you know what you're doing, is quite simply winning. So the last thing I want to really briefly touch on is what if black doesn't accept the gambit? Now, this is where the Vienna gets really muddled at the beginner level, because this often leads to very, very open, very symmetrical positions where not a lot of pieces are traded off right away, and it's much more difficult to establish who has the dominant position. Now, firstly, I'll note that black has to deny the gambit correctly with a move like d6 or d5. If they play a move like knight to c6, for example, white is again winning right out of the gate. You take this pawn, force the knight back. Again, just like if the gambit had happened, we can push this pawn, force the knight into the corner, and develop our knight to f3. And you'll notice that this position is almost identical to if the gambit had occurred. You can see here the only difference is that A, we haven't given up our pawn on f4, and B, they've got this extra knight developed to c6. Now this position is just completely winning for white, and you should have no problem going out into the rest of the game. But what happens, for example, if black denies the gambit correctly with a move like d6? So I'll just go over very briefly what might happen in a position like this. We may see the knight get pinned. We'll bring our bishop out. Black will often pin our knight as well over there. We can push this pawn. Both sides make castle. They'll bring their knight out, and we can bring our knight out, pinning theirs, for example. And really, it'll just lead to positions like this that are really quite equal and much harder for beginners to make progress in, instead of, for example, if they play something like the copycat variation, where you can reliably get a winning position out of the opening. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you have good games playing the Vienna in the future.